Welcome back to the channel, guys. Great to have you back. So, Metallica recently put out a new remastered disc, as they've been doing for some time now. They've been working their way through their back catalogue, all the way back from Kill 'Em All up to now Load, the latest reissue or remastered album to be put out. And this is all on the back of them, forming their own record label, Blackened Records, and basically making sure that they got ownership of all their masters that were available, to get from the old studios, from the old studio storage units and things like that. Over the years, they've steadily worked through and reacquired all their original tracks, which is a nice position of freedom to be in, to obviously own all of those master tapes and know that they're safe and sound, in your possession as the artist, as opposed to just being in some storage unit somewhere with a record label. Especially bearing in mind what happened to, I think it was on like the Universal lot or something like that, and there was like EMI's records, master tapes, and things like that were stored there. There was a huge fire, and loads of people's masters were lost, as well as like film masters and all kinds of things like that. So I think it's just one of those things. If you're an artist and you're lucky enough to be in a commanding position of dictating authority, business-wise, like Metallica finds themselves in, then you're able to do this sort of thing. Now, from the listener's standpoint, I kind of wondered about Load, because I thought it was a bit of an odd thing. I wondered if they would go through their whole catalogue just systematically, or whether they would just remaster the older records, because they kind of needed remastered, right? So I think there's a couple different sides to this, but it does beg the question, why remaster Load? Load, on the face of it, the audio quality of it stands up pretty well. And mastering, if you're familiar with the process, mostly deals with fine-tuning of EQ and the limiting. And what does the limiting mean? It means essentially bringing the level, the overall perceived loudness of the entire track up to a competitive degree, you might say. So when it's played alongside other people's music, you don't go from one track where it being like really punchy and dynamic, and then the next song comes on and it's kind of flat and dead and a little bit soft in terms of volume. And that can happen for all kinds of reasons. So there's a difference between sort of outright loudness and perceived loudness. And that's kind of what mastering engineers do, is they take an already good mix, hopefully, and they just refine it so it can be brought up to this like really kind of punchy, clear playing, loud, impactful level. And if they do their job right, it's not so loud that it distorts, it's not so loud that it's kind of harsh or overly crushed where all the dynamics of the music are kind of lost, but at the same time it does have that presence that kind of announces itself out of the speakers on any given radio system or any given streaming service. Anyway, so that's essentially what they've gone ahead and done, is remaster Load. Now, obviously, the other side to this is that every time they've done one of these remasters, they've gone back and compiled this, great collector's piece of, all different photography that happened over the years, like sort of rarities and things like that. They've compiled those. If there's any B-sides or demos, they usually include those, and obviously throw in plenty of live stuff. So, certainly there's a lot of value, I guess, for the collector of any of these kind of remaster packages. I don't own any. I mean, I'm a big Metallica fan, but I've got to be honest, like, it's mostly about the music, the actual experience of listening to music for me. Although there is a part of me that likes the packaging and the smell of it, and the tactile nature of actually owning it. But I'm not one of these people that has to, put it this way, if I already own a record and it's already good, I'm not going to be coaxed out to go buy a second copy of it unless there is something radically different about it. So I'll name a couple of instances. I've got Megadeth, their Risk album, that got remastered, and I believe Cryptic Writings got remastered as well. There might be others, but those two in particular I'm going to use as a reference because Risk, when it first came out, obviously it's kind of Megadeth's, I guess, pop rock thing. It's their answer to Load in a way, right? Metallica did Load, and I think Megadeth kind of, I don't know, did they get nervous or something? Did they see Metallica doing that and think, oh, we should go down that similar route? I don't know. But I don't think it's a coincidence that the two bands, they were very competitive at the time. And maybe Megadeth, having watched the commercial success that Metallica had with the Black Album, and then kind of seeing which road they were kind of going down with Load, it kind of went not a similar vein in terms of it not being so bluesy and country like, but they definitely made it more like kind of pop rock, only just nudging in the door for metal in some ways. Anyway, so Risk came out. Now, Risk is a weird album because I've actually think it's got some great songs on it. As a rock album, it's superb, absolutely superb. And it's a similar case for me with Load and Reload. There's some good metal moments on them, but very few and far between. But as a hard rock or like slower metal album, you might say in the vein of like a Sabbath record or something like that. Like, metal doesn't have to be fast to be metal. I get that. But in the context of like more of a hard rock edge thing, it's also Load and Reload are superb records for that. But in the context of the overall picture of metal, not so great. Right. If you're new here, please consider subscribing, follow the channel for future content. On the topic of cryptic writings and Risk, the one thing that you got along with the remaster was the fact that the two records were remixed. It turns out that there were ideas that I'm guessing Dave Mustaine in particular, on reflection, and maybe the other guys in the band, were like, there was all these kind of cool takes and tidbits and ideas that weren't included on the original mix, or maybe we weren't bold enough on this part, or always thought this part it should have been heavier. The heavy riff should have been louder. The two guitars in unison needed to both be, punchy and aggressive there. And instead we chose like this light effects, clean passage or whatever, and that was too loud, and so then the part comes across as a little like wimpy. And so on those two records I went back and kind of fixed a lot of those things. In particular, I think Cryptic Writings, the remaster and remix, it plays a lot better than the original release in a lot of ways. Not everything. There's some stuff that's a little bit better on the original release, but there's a damn good few things where you're like, yeah, that's an improvement over the original, and I can see why they would go back and kind of go, we have an opportunity to change this, let's do it. But that doesn't seem to be the case with these Metallica projects. For my own part, I like Load and Reload well enough, but I'm not going to lie, every time each one came out, there was a bit of disappointment, because for me, the Black Album, I liked that it was a nice balance of what came before and what they were trying to go for next. Probably got overplayed to death and all that kind of thing, so there's a couple of songs that I struggle to listen to these days, like Nothing Else Matters. Like, if you put that on, I'm just like, not again. Unforgiven's not far behind, and Sad But True. But the rest of the songs on the record, I still enjoy them quite a lot. But the thing about the Black Album compared to, say, something like Load is there's a lot of like edge and attack, a lot of bite to the record. It's not tuned down for a start. There's just, and James's vocals, very critically, James's vocals still bark and still shout, and they still have like this kind of balls and attack, right? It seemed like the logical next step to Justice, but then I kind of hoped that what would have happened next would they would have kind of proved that you could have this real intense high level production with their band, and then maybe have worked that out of their system a bit, and then gone a bit back to the higher tempo thrash stuff. Maybe not as complex or progressive looking maybe as Justice, But with all the production stuff that they learned, maybe go in some ways a little bit more of a return to something like Puppets, even if it had a modern twist on it, but just like bringing the tempo back up and a bit more thrash punch. And obviously they didn't do that. They kind of took their feet, their feet off the throttle, so to speak, even more so with Load and Reload. But there's still one or two kick-ass tunes, like Ain't My Bitches, pretty cool track on there. Wasting My Hate's a pretty cool track. I think Until It Sleeps is a really good track, even though that is the more, that's the single, and it's kind of straight 4/4 and all that kind of stuff. House of Jack Built, great atmosphere, cool thematically. That there's a lot of stuff to like, especially on the first half of the record, or first side, depending on your format. And it's a similar story with Reload. It opens quite well, generally speaking, in the first 5 or 6 tracks. It's generally pretty strong, and then the back end of the record, it kind of grinds down, and then there's usually a one pick-me-up song, and then there's the epic finisher. And both of them actually, I think, have good album closers. Outlaw Torn and Fixer were pretty good album closers, and some of James's best lyric writing and things like that. So there is some really good orchestration, in my opinion, still on Load and Reload that still show Metallica's class, if you will. It just felt like the balloon had been popped somewhat, right? I think that's a fair way to sum it up. But I do think some people are probably a little unnecessarily harsh on them because they're not thrash records, and so they don't necessarily talk objectively about how good the records are, but they just talk about their disappointment because they're not thrash records. And that's also fair enough. There's some people who, that's their thing. They're in their lane and they like their lane, and it's like, that's fair enough. Like, who am I to criticize? Personally, I like quite a diverse range of music, so I like the records well enough, but I'm not going to lie, there was an air of disappointment that they didn't kick it back up a notch. Okay? But anyway, going back to my original point, this record was made with producer Bob Rock again, and the mixing and production on these two records are fantastic. Again, I don't quite put it in the same league as the Black Album because the atmosphere isn't as kind of dark, and the drums don't sound like they're in the same kind of really big room environment. It doesn't. They set out on the Black Album to make it sound like it was Metallica in an arena, and I think they captured that pretty well, and I think that's the Metallica sound. I think Puppets captures that pretty well as well, probably better than Bob Rock will acknowledge. But I do think he improved upon it in terms of the mixing for the Black Album. I think he achieved what he set out to do, but I think that Metallica had gotten pretty close with Master of Puppets already. Let's put it that way. But then, like Load and Reload, they sound nice enough, but yeah, they're just not quite as good for me, and they don't have quite as much cut. They're a bit warmer sounding, so the guitars lack a little bit of attack and that kind of thing. But overall, they sound really good. The drums sound really good. The low end is probably some of the best low end I think they've ever achieved on any of their records, even the modern records. Trujillo has a very different sound to Newsted, so that's to be expected to some degree. You're never going to duplicate that exactly, but I do think Bob Rock is very, very good with bottom end. So I think they achieved quite a lot with that sound, and there was a point where I thought they kind of peaked how much like grit, grind, attack, bottom end, smash and punch you could kind of fit through 2 speakers, because for a long time I never heard a record come out that really challenged Load and Reload overall for their overall filling of the sonicscape with kind of a hard rock metal vibe. So I was a little surprised to hear that they were going to press on with all the remasters, because the audio stands up even today. If you play it side by side against other records, it's not lacking in loudness. It may be a little compared to, say, Death Magnetic, but Death Magnetic is too loud and it's clipping and it's fizzbox, right? So you don't need to compete with that. That's the conclusion of the loudness wars, and Metallica won by breaking all the rules and making it sound a bit cack by doing that. Great record in terms of creativity, but Death Magnetic, the mastering and the limiting and the mixing, and they just pushed it too hard in a couple of different stages, and then what you end up with is this like real dry as a bone cardboard box loud ass snare and these like fizz guitars. But it's, you know, in other ways the record's got some nice tasty bits on it, so don't get me wrong, I'm not knocking it, but I think they made a similar mistake to what they did with Justice, where it's like somebody just needed to like rein Lars back in and rein James back in just a tad. But anyway, Load and Reload against pretty much all other records that kind of follow it, that are mixed sensibly and mastered sensibly, for records that were done in the sort of mid to late 90s, or we were talking like sort of between 94 and 97. I think it's 94 is release of Load and 97 for Reload, something along those lines. Those records held up really well. I don't think they really needed technically to be remastered, but I'll have a listen to the remastered version. I haven't heard it yet, just to see, you know, is there any kind of noticeable improvement. Now, I got the Kill 'Em All remaster, which did need a remaster, really did, and I think it really helped that record, because there's some really great bits and the mix was really good, and it just needed leveling up and just a bit of room to breathe, so that could be done. Ride, when I listened to that, there was very little difference, if you ask me. There's a bit of a level jump, but overall it doesn't seem to be that they were able to do much to sort of fill it out. It's still lacking a lot of bass presence and things like that. How much of that is due to the mastering engineer? How much of that is due to Metallica? Because we know that they're famously stubborn. Like when they had the chance to remaster and Justice, they could have remixed it. They could have mixed the bass in, and they chose not to because they were like, "Oh no, well, you know, it's a legendary record the way it was, and it should just be kept the way it was, like warts and all." And it's like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, it sounds better with bass. It sounds better with bass. Like, we all know now, because there's loads of people have done their own mixes with the stems. I have my own mix that I listen to at home with the stems, with Jason's stems on it, and it's not perfect, but it's fucking better because it has bass. You know? The Black Album, I have my own remastered copy, so I didn't buy the remastered copy. I was really happy with what I was able to do with a remastering pass of my own on it. And I have the same for Justice. I have my own that I've done, and I bought the official one for Master, for Puppets. And frankly, I think mine's actually a bit better than the one that they released. So it got me thinking, like, the Load, Reload, and anything subsequent need a remaster. Saint Anger definitely needs a fucking remix, though. I hope they don't just live with their ego up their ass and they're like, no, it was the sign of the times and an image of where we were at, and, you know, fucking fix that record. Metallica, if you're watching this, fix Saint Anger. Was that some kind of monster remix EP that they put out? That sounds pretty cool. A little bit of editing, make the songs a little tighter, and a real fucking snare drum on the record, and sharp, gritty, cutting fucking guitars like they're supposed to be. James Hetfield always used to talk about how heavy guitars, it's not just about tuning down and how low and sludgy it goes, it's about the grind, the attack, the grit, the teeth. So yeah, I hope they do that. But Load, yeah, maybe in some ways lacked a little bit of that bite, that attack, but not by much. I don't think that they really needed to be remastered, but I can understand why they've done it for the collector's thing. And let's be honest, I think there's a sense of like putting their affairs in order. They know that their best years are behind them, and actually now most of their years to live are behind them. Their guys are going to be approaching their 70s, and you know, there's probably a case that they want to just leave the collection of records in the best way that they think that they could have. Although where they get this complex about not fixing problems that they have, how many bands would kill for the opportunity to be like, I've had to live with that shitty mistake we made 30 years ago, and we have the power to fix it. And then they're like, no, I'm just going to leave the mistake because it's like kind of quirky and it's always the way it was. I mean, you could always put out two versions. Sorry, I'm rambling on about Justice, but fucking makes me angry. But anyway, let me know in the comments what do you think about the kind of the whole Metallica remasters and all of that stuff. Have you gone out and bought them? Did you get the big box sets and like, was it worth it? Basically, was it worth it for you? I've only just bought the CD remasters for a couple. Like I said, the first three records. I didn't get the Justice one because I have my own mix of it, and I was like, and because they didn't add bass, I would rather have bass, so I did that. I did my own Black Album one, so I was like, yeah, that sounds fucking amazing. So I'm like totally happy with that. But Load and Reload, it was like I never saw any cause sonically to have to remaster them. I had to play around with them in my DAW, and I was like, I don't think I can do better than Bob Rock here, so I'm just going to leave it. It's different with the Black Album because it was 1991. They were still exploring the upper levels of a kind of headroom and things like that, and there were things that were being improved about the handling of mid-range and stuff like that. Black Album's still a little scoopy, so there's a little room to play there. Load and Reload don't really have that same thing. They've got quite a full kind of mid-range and lower mid-range, and so there's a little less to exploit there. So yeah, I'd be interested to hear, like, if you've got the Load remaster, what do you think of it? Was it worth it sonically? Was it worth it for the packages and the trinkets and collectibles and stuff? Let me know in the comments what you think, and until next time, I'll see you later. Take it easy.